So the first step you'd want to do is make sure your view attributes are correct. So you want your level overrides, line weights, line styles turned on. And then you come over to your references. And for this, just to set up your sheet boundaries, it's really not a lot to add into. The one main thing you want to add is your geometry file. And then I'm also going to add in my existing topography file. So that's more just kind of as a guide of making sure the extents of my viewports are where I want them. So I have both of these. And once these are loaded, we want to start utilizing this logical name. So the logical name over here is where you want to add, excuse me, I'll just go back to here. So when you're adding these, these do not need to be live nested. Give it a second here. Once these are loaded, like I was saying, we're going to want to change the logical name to match the description for the file. So since we've been moving towards our naming conventions for a lot of the files, you can kind of get a little confusing as to like what is what. So like work, survey, line work, like, you know, like what is this, right? So you want to come over to existing, or for the logical name, we're going to name this existing topography. And then this is proposed geometry.
And I would try to get in the habit too of making sure that you put in the logical name when you do attach it, so you don't forget to add that in later.
Yep. Okay, so we got that set up here. You can see we just have the existing topography or geometry. This already has our stationing displayed within that reference file, so this will help us line up exactly where we want our sheet cuts. So let me just go back to, all right. That's when we want to go to our name boundary. Same under the drawing production tab, just like we had before, come to name boundary. And this is where we want to utilize this first civil plan icon up here. So we just want to kind of set this up before we start clicking anywhere. So drawing seed, we want to make sure this is a plan single. Detail scale, this is going to match the scale of our model here. So these are going to be 50 scale sheets. We wanted 100 scale sheets. Obviously, you choose that one. So now we start looking down here at the prompt. So it's saying place name boundary civil plan, identify path elements. Since we're cutting it around our alignment, separate from like the way we were doing on the row plot, we want to select our alignment here. And as soon as you click that, you can see these stations start to pop in here. So if we wanted to just manually start randomly choosing where we want to go, we can start it out, you know, this station right here, 112 and whatever, right? I want to create sheet boundaries for the entire project. So I want to first select the start location, click this left arrow, that will go to the start. So that's going to start at 100. Stop location, check this one, and you hit this right arrow, and it's going to go all the way to the end of the project. Next step, you want to make sure your length is set to the correct length. So since I selected 50 scale or 50 detail scale, it automatically chose 700. 700 will fit perfectly within our 11 by 17 borders. If you have a different scale, that will need to be modified. That should be set to wherever you change this 50 scale to 100 scale. That should automatically change. So we're just going to go through, I think, do we do the create drawing here? I'm not going to have the create drawing selected yet. We're going to do that on the next step. So once those two are checked, now you can just click once in the view. And before you click the next accept button, you can kind of want to just look through, make sure you got the full extents. Let's say we only wanted to go to 184. So that's where you'd say your stop would be 184. And this, before you hit anything else, you can see it stops right there. So it's just a live look before you actually accept. So we're going to go back to the end. So we got them all laid out, and now I'm good. I know this is where I want to lay everything out. So I click once more. It's going to go through a little bit of an operation. It's going to create all of those name boundaries for me. Okay. All right, so now to see all of our name boundaries, you want to come up to this, the name boundary icon up here and hit this little bottom arrow. This will pull up your dialog so you can actually see all of your plan groups that you've created. So this is based off of our proposed US 24 geometry. And you can see all the plans that are located in here. If you somehow needed to, you're coming back and you wanted to add that next set of, let's say you only did the first 10, and then you want to do this again. If it automatically named them, 1 through 10 again, you can select one of these, you go to your properties, and this is where, should pop up over here. And this is where you can rename your name boundaries however you see fit. So now that we have those all set up, we want to create our drawings and sheets from here. So this is where, like I was speaking before, we want to have this separated out. So I'm not going to go through this step, but this is where you would get out of this file. Actually, before you get out of the file, you want to detach or at least turn off all of these references so they're not coming in. So this is your sheet name boundary file. This is where whatever discipline needs to use them, they would attach this file directly to their discipline production container. And then they'd go through the steps of actually creating the drawings and sheets from there. That has been taken care of in the previous training, so I'm not going to go over that right now, but that's pretty much all you need to do to set up your sheet name boundaries. So I don't think there's really much else for me to say unless there's some questions. Did I miss anything on that, Jeremy?
You're good. We will see if there's any questions.
Okay.
No, I would say go ahead and turn off your geometry because you may need to use that again, but I would detach your topography because even if it is turned off, it's still data in there that even if this is referenced to other files, it still kind of goes through and tries, oh, okay, well, it's turned off, but it still goes through the process of looking for it.
Yeah.
Good point.
And I believe you still need to keep the geometry in there because the sheets are based on
exactly. Yep.
Because they are data. They are data. So like, yeah, you hover over here, you can say it does have information from that. So yeah, I guess if there's any questions. Project limits by a few feet. Do we need to delete and start over? Can we dynamically change the sheet boundaries? So you cannot dynamically change the sheet boundaries. So that is something we've learned as well. You can't, once you start modifying this, if you start pulling these and you start manually modifying the sheet boundaries, it messes up the drawings and the sheets down the line. If you change any sort of your geometry, you most likely, and Jeremy can speak to this, but I believe you're going to have to at least redo your sheet boundaries. If you're extending it just slightly and you just need to add one more sheet, that's where you go through the name boundary tool. You would select, the end of here as your station, and you would just, add that other station with the 700 length. Go to your name boundaries and rename that. But Jeremy, actually, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I believe you're going to have to redo the sheet boundaries if you change anything with the geometry.
Yeah, it's going to depend on where your stations are at, because most of the time, if you do change geometry, you change stationing, different things. Your tick marks are going to move, so your match lines are going to move. So you're probably more than likely going to have to recut your name boundaries to fit that in. Can you modify them? You can, but like as Mike was saying, it messes up things down the road. So it's really, you got to be very cautious on what you're modifying and how you're modifying it.
Right. If on the beginning, if you were extended the beginning more to the left, that would definitely mess it up. I'm thinking if you had extended down here and then you just wanted to add onto the end of the project, I believe that would be okay. But again, I'd caution against it. So
you would be able to add to the end of the project. When you create that, you need to select the existing name boundary group to get it to all behave as a single entity.
Through this, right? So you come into here and then you'd add.
Well, no, when you create the name boundary, you select the group it belongs to.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah. So you would need to, if you're hoping for it to do match lines, if you're hoping to interact it as a single, you'd have to select that existing to add that on in.
Okay.
would want to point out we can make changes to these dynamically. The key that the underlying key that we're getting to here is the location where I cross the center line, the alignment can't change. But if I needed to shift one of those up or down to show a little bit more of a frontage road, that type of, we'll call it lateral adjustment, or changing actually the boundaries of the named boundary itself. If I wanted to put in a vertice or take out a vertice, we can do some of that. But the stationing is hard coded at creation. So anything that modifies the stationing at the start or the end, changing the length of a curve anywhere before, anything like that, is going to require recreating the name boundaries.
Yep.
And yeah, and great points, Stephen. Also great comment, Chris. Yeah. Best practice. Yeah. Never start your stationing at 0. Even if it's a main alignment, point control, whatever it is, don't start them at 0, because a lot of times you have to go back from that. So you can see we started at 100. So definitely, that's a great point. And the other thing I would also point out too is most of the time at the beginning of your sheet and the end of your sheets, you're probably going to want a little room on the left of your stationing, and then same thing on the end of the stationing. So keep that in mind too as you're developing those sheets.
And the software will accept values before the start of the stationing. So if I put in an 80 in front of a 100,
Yep,
we'll move that back 20 feet.
exactly.
So
Right. Yeah. You could do 90 plus 90 or
Yep.
whatever. Yep. And then they would shift that. Yep. And to your point, yes, if you were going to add something else, when you're coming through this operation here, once you select your alignment, you just want to make sure your group is the same group from before, and then it'll add on to that. Is that correct, Steve?
that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Which the extension to that is if you get to a point where that boundary actually lands on an intersection, you can actually go through this process a couple times and shorten up a couple of those boundaries. They're going to be shorter on the sheet, obviously, right? But if you need to shift something a little bit to land right, you can create the first 6, do a short boundary to land on an intersection as you need it to. As long as you're applying it to the same group, you can then come back and do the rest of the alignment.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good point, because that's what we actually had to do on not this project, but a similar project where there was like 2 areas where we were right in the middle of an intersection, and we're like, okay, let's run the first 7 or so at 700 length, do a couple at the 500 or 600 length,
Yeah.
and then in additional. So, and then like you're saying, as long as you do it to the same group, it'll all be good.
And then doing that, since we do get to reference these, if you do that once, again, and any discipline who wants to match up that setup just simply references it in, and everybody's aligned in the same there.
Yep.
Exactly. And that's the key point to this. And I don't know, Schwab, were you going to go ahead and do that? Should reference it into a container?
I thought we weren't going to go through that.
Yeah. And we don't need to. I think on the previous videos of what everyone will see, what this is, and as Stephen just alluded to, this name boundary is for your specialty groups. It's for pretty much, I mean, it's for most specialty groups. You're going to have some one-off and some different things that you may have to do for walls, or some drainage pipes, or some other things that you might have to create some separate sheets for. But this is for going to be like your main name boundaries file. And this file will be referenced into your container files. So then that way you can cut those sheets separately from that. So that provides consistency with this, efficiency, super efficiency, because now you just have one file, one name boundary file that you're dealing with, versus doing name boundaries for every single specialty group and doing those things. You have one that everyone can utilize.